When we think of medieval warriors, our minds instantly leap to knights in shining armor, lords on horseback, banners flying, their swords flashing in the sun. But the truth is far more surprising. Behind those armored elites stood an entire army of warriors history has almost forgotten, men who carried spears instead of swords, who fought in mud instead of on horseback, and who decided battles more than the knights they served. Today we uncover 5 classes of medieval warriors you've likely never heard of, but without them, kingdoms would have crumbled, empires would have fallen, and history itself might have turned out very differently. Imagine the year is 1066. The air is thick with tension. England's king, Harold Godwinson, is racing north to meet an invasion by the Norse. Who rides beside him? Not knights, not peasants, but the housecarls. These were the king's personal guard, heavily armed warriors with 2-handed axes so massively they could split a horse's skull in a single blow. Their armor was chainmail, their shields tall and broad, their discipline unmatched. They weren't nobles playing at war. They weren't peasants conscripted for a season. Housecarls were professionals, full-time fighters, loyal to their king until death. They stood in the front lines at Stamford Bridge and again at Hastings, forming the shield wall that held back Norman cavalry again. But what makes them fascinating isn't just their weapons, it is their role in a society on the edge of transformation. They were a bridge between Viking warbands and medieval armies, carrying the ferocity of Norse raiders into a more organized English system. And when Harold fell at Hastings, so too did the housecarls, the last of their kind swallowed by the knightly age. But if you thought the age of the sword ended with them, you'll be surprised by the next classman who could win wars with nothing more than wood and string. Picture a battlefield in France, Agincourt, 1415. Thousands of armored knights lower their lances and charge across muddy ground, but before they ever reach the enemy, they face a storm unlike any other arrows blackening the sky, falling like rain. These were the English longbowmen, perhaps the most feared infantry of the late Middle Ages. Armed with bows as tall as a man, they could launch arrows with terrifying speed. 6, even 10 per minute. Their range was devastating. Their discipline, legendary. But here's the secret. These men weren't nobles. They were yeomen, freeborn farmers trained from childhood by law to practice archery every Sunday. A boy grew up with the longbow in hand, his bones reshaped by the strain of the drawing, his back muscles warped from years of training. By adulthood, he was a living weapon. At battles like Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, they broke the might of French chivalry. Knights clad in glittering armor, heirs of centuries of tradition, fell not to swords or lances, but to the shafts of common men. This was more than just military power, it was social revolution. The longbow gave ordinary farmers the ability to bring down kings' champions. It shifted the balance of the medieval world. But if arrows were deadly from afar, another group thrived in the chaos of close quarters, where pikes and swords tangled in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Most people know of knights, armored cavalry crashing into battle with the thunder of hooves. But the hobilars? They were different. Born in Ireland and later adopted across Britain, hobilars were light cavalry, riders on small but hardy horses known as hobbies. Unlike knights, they didn't charge headlong into lances. Instead, they harried flanks, scouted terrain, raided supply lines, and melted away before heavy cavalry could catch them. Their secret weapon was mobility. Where knights lumbered in steel, hobilars darted across forests, bogs, and hills. They carried spears or light swords, sometimes even bows. Their armor was minimal, a gambesson or light mail at most. But what they lacked in brute strength, they made up for in speed and cunning. Imagine them slipping into enemy territory under cover of night, torching villages, ambushing columns, disappearing into the mist before dawn. For kings and lords, they were invaluable. Eyes and ears on the battlefield, disruptors of enemy plans. In many ways, they were the ancestors of modern light cavalry and reconnaissance troops, forgotten by history books, but essential to medieval warfare. And yet, while hobilars struck fear in the shadows, another warrior class was bred for the brutal grind of the battlefield itself, the billmen, with weapons that turned every clash into a storm of steel. The billhook was never meant for war. It was a farmer's tool, used to clear brush, prune trees, and cut hedges. But in the hands of a medieval soldier it became something else entirely. The bill, one of the deadliest polearms of the age. Billmen were the backbone of English armies in the 14th and 15th centuries. Armed with bills, long shafts topped with curved, hooked blades, they could hack, stab, pull riders from horseback or hook shields aside. In massed ranks, they became a wall of steel that even armored knights feared. What makes them compelling is how ordinary they were. These were peasants and villagers, men who spent half their lives tending fields. Yet when summoned, they stood shoulder to shoulder in the mud of battles like Towton and Barnet. Wars of kings fought on the backs of farmers. Their strength was unity. Individually, the billman was vulnerable. Together, in disciplined ranks, they could bring down the greatest warriors of the realm. The bill was a weapon of necessity but also of ingenuity, a reminder that the tools of survival could, in times of war, reshape the destiny of nations. And yet, as powerful as they were in battle, the legacy of another class would outlast them all, one tied not just to war but to freedom itself. If knights were the symbol of nobility, the yeoman would become the symbol of independence. Yeomen were freeborn farmers, neither serfs nor nobles. They owned their land, worked their fields, and bore the responsibility of defending the realm. Bound by law to practice archery, they became the backbone of England's military system. But their story is larger than the battlefield. The rise of the yeoman marked the slow erosion of feudalism. Here were men who owed no lord their labor, who could stand as landowners, who fought not as retainers, but as citizens. When English kings marched to war, they didn't just summon knights, they called on yeomen. At Crécy, at Poitiers, at Agincourt, there were yeoman archers who shattered armies. At home, yeomen kept villages safe, ensured harvests continued, and upheld local justice. In time, they became the seed of something greater, the concept of the free Englishman, a class of people whose rights and independence would echo far beyond the Middle Ages. The housecarls with their axes, the longbowmen with their silent storms, the hobblars with their swift raids, the billmen with their farmers' blades, and the yeomen with their quiet strength. These were the warriors who made medieval armies possible. Knights may dominate legend and storybooks, but it was these forgotten fighters who truly shaped the battlefield, and with it, the course of history. And perhaps the greatest lesson they leave us is this: history is not written by the few in shining armor, but by the many whose names we may never know, but whose courage still echoes through time.